so really what I want to do is, I've had a relationship with ISPRS for over a decade. I've done a couple of keynotes in Istanbul, in Wuhan, in China. And I've done a lot when I was at the OGC. I tried to do a lot more with ISPRS. Now I'm at GEO. One of the things I'm trying to drive is youth engagement. So normally with these presentations, someone talks through all their slides, and then at the end, they kind of talk about ways to get involved. And what I'd like to do is up front is say, I think there are two ways for engaging. One is we've just put out a call for people to participate in the GEO working groups. There are new working groups. So there's one on capacity development, there's one on climate change, there's one on disasters, disaster risk reduction, and there's one on data. For this group, having looked at some of the profiles in the chat, the data one might be interesting for a number of you. The way GEO works, which I'll talk through, is we are an intergovernmental organization, so we are there to represent countries. The countries are the members, and the countries pay for GEO. So we get all our money from the countries to do what we do. I've seen Ireland, Azerbaijan, Kenya, Philippines, Turkey, Japan, Italy, India, and I'm sure many other countries involved. All of those countries, except Azerbaijan, are members of GEO. I'm talking to Azerbaijan right now about them joining GEO, and I think it will happen quite soon. So the working groups is one way to get involved. The other way to get involved is to work with, we're building something called a knowledge hub, and I'll talk to that as well. And I think in about 3 months' time, assuming we get approval to go ahead from our executive committee, then there'll be an opportunity for some early testers of the knowledge hub. So those are two of the areas. And then the work program as a whole, the GEO work program, if you see anything as I'm talking, then you can ask questions, you can stop me. So the title is about informed policy and decision making, because really what we exist to do is to help countries understand the value and usefulness of Earth observations for research, policy, decision making and action. Next slide, please. When we talk about Earth observations, when we talk about Earth observations,
sorry, next.
When we talk about Earth observations, we're talking about anything in, on, around the Earth. I just leave it at this slide, it's fine. But what I want to make clear is it's not just space-based data, it's satellite data, it's in situ data, so it could be groundwater, soil moisture, it could also be models. So we're talking about all these different things, which are broadly called Earth observations by GEO. So on this slide that you can see now, you can see that we're talking about what we used to do a decade ago, which was all about open data. So we've been driving the availability of data for a decade. So Landsat, the Landsat agreement to make Landsat open was signed at a GEO plenary more than a decade ago. And from there, we've moved from we're still working on the availability of data. At our plenary last year, we announced that Japan and China are making ALOS and GAOFEN open data as well. But we're moving from the availability and accessibility to integration, usability, and usefulness. So from that perspective, we've worked much more around processes and the standards and how to integrate Earth observations with other data types, such as national statistics. And where we want to get to is really the usefulness of Earth observations to support countries from this action, impact, and value perspective. So that's really where we're working on international policy to help drive that. Any questions? Does that all make sense? Okay, next slide, please. So currently there are 110 members. Well, there's actually 111 because Nicaragua just joined. So you can see the area where we're pushing to get the most countries to join is now Africa. So we have good coverage around the world, and Africa is the place where we're really pushing hardest. Next, please. To support the work with the members, we have what are called participating organizations, and those are essentially partners. So you can see a lot of the UN agencies are in here, the World Bank, the WMO, UN Environment, but there are also a number of non-governmental organizations and international organizations. So there's about 130 of these organizations who work with us through our work program and other activities to support the use of Earth observations across all these different policy initiatives. Next, please. So this is just a snapshot. The key here is that we have more than 60 different activities in the work program, and some of those activities have had billions of dollars invested in them, such as GFOI, the Global Forest Observation Initiative. But some of them are also community activities. So they have 5 or 10 people who are working on something related to Earth observations, for example, citizen science. So a community activity can be started by anyone as long as you have a group of people willing to work and put time into it. We have initiatives which are the next level up, and there's about probably 30 of those, and that's where people are working together as well, but it's a bit more focused and it has a plan and a program. And then we have a number of flagships. We have 4 flagships, and the flagships have, they tend to have their own secretariat, they have their own money, and they are major activities. So this here, this is a look at the work program. So as I said, it's actually more than 60 activities. There are many different countries involved, and we don't know how many collaborators because people come and go all the time. But there's a huge investment that's been made, and ultimately this is for societal benefit. So it's to impact lives. Next slide, please. So these are the flagships that I talked about: the Global Forest Observation Initiative, the Global Agricultural Monitoring Initiative, the Biodiversity Observation Network, and the Global Observation System for Mercury Monitoring. So these are the flagships, and then we have a number of different activities. So I'm just going to go through, next one please. I'm just going to pick one of them because I'm not obviously going to go through all 60. If you go to the next slide please. GeoGLAM is on agricultural monitoring, and this is about food security. And so GeoGLAM looks at, if you go to the next slide, it was created in 2011 because of the G20 Ministers of Agriculture. They wanted to have a way to look at market price volatility. And so they put together an agricultural market information system, and at the same time they created GeoGLAM. So GeoGLAM was creating a crop monitor for these different key crops that you can see, maize, wheat, soybean, rice, and providing these monthly crop monitors to different countries. So I think now there's about 50 crop monitors. Next slide, please. So that here you can see some crop monitoring activity. It's gone from doing just crop monitoring to doing early warning as well. So because of the information that's received through the Earth observations for the crop monitoring, they're able to predict when drought and other areas that are going to impact the early warning can be used. So early warning has been something that has developed on top of the crop monitor. So this is a value added service through GeoGlam. Next, please. So that was obviously showing GeoGlam in Africa. This one is showing GeoGlam in Southeast Asia. So this is an example of Asia rice. And you can see, again, that the conditions are there. It tells you whether it's poor conditions, favorable conditions, and it tells you, you know, where there's an early warning for this country or there's not an early warning. So this is a very valuable service. On the right-hand side, you can see a number of the partners. There are scores of partners working in GeoGlam because it's being, you know, it's an operational service that's been around for many years now. Next one, please. So this is just to show that everything we're trying to do is about impact. So here in a place called Karamoja in Uganda, we were able to give them advance notice that there was going to be, through the early warning system, that they were going to have food security issues because of the crop failure. So this was done a number of years ago, and we were able to trigger the disaster risk financing from the World Bank, which impacted these 30,000 households. So these are the kind of things that we're trying to get to so we can measure this impact on the ground, where Earth observations is really helping countries to help their citizens. Next, please. So this is one, I don't know why the numbers have all come up. It's supposed to be numbers 1 to 5. For some reason, they're all number 1. But these are the priorities that GeoGlam's working on for the next 5 years. And one of the things I've highlighted is strengthening and expanding national and regional networks. Now, given that the ISPRS is a global organization and that all the people on this call are coming from around the world, this is maybe somewhere that people can contribute in terms of the building the global monitoring capacity and the capacity development. This might interest some of you. Next slide, please. So I picked another one, which is GeoBlue Planet. This is where, again, this is working on the Sustainable Development Goals. It's working on the UN Decade of Ocean Science. It's looking at ocean observations, working with the United Nations IOC, the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission, and with GEOSS, the Global Ocean Observing System, really to try and coordinate and make better use of these ocean observations, where there's a huge blue economy, but there's also many other impacts, environmental impacts of activities such as these oil spills and sargassum and other activities in the ocean. Next, please. So to do some of this work, we're collaborating with the custodian agencies for the SDGs. So this example here is with UN Environment, where we're working on the methodologies for SDG 14.11 and looking at the impact of coastal eutrophication and marine litter. So this is probably a year into the work. We work with UN Environment on SDG 6 as well, on 661 with Google Earth Engine. So we have some experience of working on these different methodologies. So in GEO, there's something called EO for SDG, which is Earth Observations for Sustainable Development Goals. And the EO for SDG initiative is working across many different SDGs. And the thematic experts are coming from the community. So in this case, it's from the marine or the ocean community. Next one, please. So other things that are being done around the oceans, here you have the ecological marine units, which has been worked on with USGS and with ESRI. They also have ecological land units that they've worked on. But I wanted to put this one in here because if you look at the bottom, it talks about the EMUs coming from 52 million global measurements from 6 key ocean variables over a 50-year period. So it's a lot of information. And this is, I guess, part of the key of Earth observations is the huge amount of data that we have to provide insights and information for policy and decision making. That's really a key role of GEO, is working to gather that information and share it with the countries and make it usable for decision making. Next one, please. So at the beginning, I talked about the Knowledge Hub. Because we have more than 60 activities in the work program, well, one of the things we want to do is we want to be able to take everything associated with the work program and make it usable, reusable, transparent. We want to make it reproducible. So we're going from open data to open science. So in that context, we want to take anything that's contained in videos and documentaries and in journal papers. We want to take all the different data types. So it could be in situ data, it could be data stored on a cloud. We want to take the code and the methods. So that could be something from GitHub, it could be R, it could be Python, whatever it is. And we want to share the results. So this is the outline for the Knowledge Hub that we've been building for the last year. Next slide, please. So this is a different way of looking at it, is that you can go in, you can do a text search. We will be curating the content. We're looking at these concepts of linked data. And again, it's all about open access. Next slide, please. So as it currently stands, we have the GEOSS platform, which, if you remember the overview I gave 5 minutes ago, it talked about the open Earth observation data and information resources that we have. It's more than 400 million resources, and those reside in the GEOSS platform. And then we have the GEO website. So you'll be able to access via the GEO website the Knowledge Hub, but you will have all of the resources that are in the GEOSS platform. So the Knowledge Hub kind of sits in the middle of all of this. And if anyone wants to read some of the documents or get more technical on this, then we can share information later. Next, please. So this is just a more conceptual way of looking at it, is that we want to be able to use the most up-to-date open data policy, data sharing, data reuse. We want to look at the cloud platforms. We're using application programming interfaces, and it's about empowering people. So it's about taking the in situ observations and the space-based data and making all of this available for reuse across the world. So this is really important, because as projects end, as people leave organizations, as things change across the community, you still have access and you have the ability to take the work that's been done on these algorithms and learn from these results and reuse them in this reproducible manner. Next one, please. So with all of this work, we need a framework. And the framework is these international policy agreements. So we call them engagement priorities for GEO. So those are the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, the Paris Agreement for Climate Change, and the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction. We're also doing work with UN Habitat on the New Urban Agenda and SDG 11. So these are the areas really that are keeping us busy to help the countries respond to those different policy agendas. Next, please. As I mentioned earlier on, one of the key activities in that area is EO for SDG. So this is Earth Observations for the Sustainable Development Goals. And the Executive Secretary is at NASA, but there are about 50 or 60 additional contributors in there, and the other co-chairs are from Mexico, Japan, and the USA. Next one, please. There was a mapping done to show where Earth observations could support Sustainable Development Goals. And I think it's probably a bit broader. This was done a few years ago. I think as we're learning more and more, and as we're doing more and more, I think the applicability is very, very broad across the SDGs, doing a lot of stuff, even acting as a proxy where no other data exists. Next one, please. So I wanted to put in some examples, again, of where we're working on Sustainable Development Goals. This example is with the National Statistical Office in Colombia, and they've been working on a project for a few years now, where they took the Earth observations data, so they took the Landsat data for 2005, 2010, 2015, and they took the statistical data for population growth for the same period, and they integrated the two, and they've produced a document, an openly available project document that talks about how they have the methodology that they used to work out this indicator on the ratio of land consumption to population growth. Next slide, please. And so what you find is that the results have shown areas where sometimes they're using more land where there's not been so much population growth and vice versa. So this helps them look at where land is not being used and where they could maybe look at setting up new economic areas or housing or other things because of the available land. Next slide, please. And so as a result of that, they've moved from indicator 1131 to looking now at 1171 on the average share of the built up area of cities available for open space. So you can see, and this work was done with GPSDD, the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data, and DO4SDG, and the World Bank, and a number of others, obviously DANI, the National Statistical Agency. Next, please. So my slide seems to have frozen. While I'm waiting for the slide to change, I just say that we're in the middle of developing an SDG toolkit, which could also be another area for the student consortium or young professionals to contribute. The SDG toolkit is looking at how do we provide data, resources, methodologies, anything relating to SDG 11 and the New Urban Agenda. It will go to other SDGs, but we're starting with SDG 11, and I'm part of that task force, so I know that you would all be very welcome to contribute to that as well. So on this slide we're at now, here we're talking about, because GEO is a global community, we also have regional GEOs which act with the countries in the different regions. So AfriGeo is working across all of Africa with almost 50 of the countries in Africa. AmeriGeo is working with about 18 to 20 countries in the Americas. AOGeo is about the same in the Asia-Oceania region. And EuroGeo is working with about, I think, about 35 to 40 countries in Europe. So although they're all following what GEO does globally, there are different focuses in each of the different regional GEOs. So for EuroGeo, there's a lot on the Horizon program. What was Horizon 2020, moving to Horizon Europe. There's a big focus on small, medium-sized enterprises. In AfriGeo, there's a lot of focus on food security, water resources management. So each regional GEO has different areas of activity. So again, this would be an area you could contribute, or you could learn from the activities that are happening in the regional GEOs as well. Next slide, please. So I wanted to put in a couple of the examples of more recent activities. So this is Digital Earth Africa. Digital Earth Africa is looking at taking the I guess everything that I've been talking about in terms of open data policy, in terms of open data availability, in terms of some of the most advanced approaches to high performance computing, looking at cloud computing, taking analysis ready data, this concept of data cubes, so time stacks, data series, and putting all of this together into a program for the whole continent of Africa. So we raised, this time last year, almost $20 million through the Helmsley Charitable Trust and DFAT, the Department for Foreign Affairs and Trade in Australia. And so that has been put to use, building the community in Africa for Digital Earth Africa. We'll be hiring a team of people in Africa for Digital Earth Africa in the next, I guess, 3 to 6 months. And we're speaking with other agencies, and I'm hoping that we have about another $9 to $12 million coming in to support activities related to Digital Earth Africa. The first product for Digital Earth Africa will be water observations from space. So this is providing, on a continental basis, every 1 to 2 weeks, whenever the data is available, analysis ready data for Africa, looking at surface water. And you can get all of this from the Digital Earth Africa website. Next slide, please. And again, Digital Earth Africa is something everyone can participate in. You can get the data, you can start to do things, you can become part of that community. The other thing we're also doing is we're working with the global technology providers. So we've worked with Amazon for over a year now, where we asked Amazon, well, I asked Amazon for $1.5 million to help us put together a program for developing countries. And so we put out a call for countries to be able to take AWS cloud credits and work on things related to those geo-engagement priorities. So Earth observations for the Agenda 2030, for the Sendai framework, and for the Paris Agreement. So we had a number of different applications that came in, and now we have 21 projects underway in developing countries. And these are fantastic. There's some really great examples of work that's being done in Brazil, in Ukraine, in different parts of Africa, and different parts of Asia, such as Indonesia. And so this is a really good example of where we're lowering the barriers of technology for the countries to engage with the most advanced cloud services. We have an open call with Google for Google Earth Engine. This is for production licenses for Google and for technical and capacity development support from a community. So it's not just for the standard Google Earth Engine licenses, it's for much more. And that's $3 million that we got from Google. And we have another call that we're going to announce hopefully quite soon with Microsoft too. So the big technology providers are really supporting us and really helping us, and it's amazing. We're also looking now to work much more with small and medium-sized enterprises, or small, medium, and micro-sized enterprises, SMMEs. So that's something we're looking at. How can we bring them into our work program, and how can we start to work with much smaller companies across the globe? Because those are the ones that will make a big difference at the local level in terms of Earth observations, in terms of data analytics, in terms of cloud services, in terms of just working and understanding the local context in each of the different countries. Next slide, please. So that's basically what I was saying, is we're working across the supply chain with the private sector. So from the upstream data providers to the value-added service providers to the downstream users. That's really how we're looking at working with everyone in the private sector. And then I think the next slide is one of my final slides. So I just wanted to summarize before Deanna and Laura say something about their engagement with GEO. I just wanted to summarize some of the things that I find myself doing. So I have a small team. communications managers in my team, the people who are the experts for Paris, Sendai, and SDGs are in my team, and I'm looking for someone to do resource mobilization in my team as well. And so we're looking at capacity development. You know, how can we help with things like digital literacy, translating science and technology into policy, and the co-design and co-production of knowledge. So not doing these things on our own, but doing them in collaboration with the countries, with the end users. Communications is a big part of it, because we want to make sure that people understand, you know, what do we mean by Earth observations? How can you use all of these resources? What training's available, but also not, you know, overburdening countries, because there's a lot of different training and things available. So trying to make it easier for them to schedule time and availability. And then collaboration. I use this term human interoperability because we talk a lot about interoperability as a community, but quite often we talk about it as semantic or syntactic or data formats, or, you know, these technical aspects. But the single biggest challenge that I've experienced in 20 odd years is the human interoperability. It's people working together. So that's a big part of what we're trying to do. And then finally, as I said, we're working with the private sector. So public-private partnerships are important, and looking at, you know, private sector needs to make a profit. So we need to understand that as well, and think about what does the private sector get, as well as what does the geo community get. Okay, I think that's me finished. It should just be a final slide with my details on it. So I just tweeted the link to the geo call for the working groups. So you can you can pick that up and have a look at that, and it guides you. It explains to you what you you know, how to go about that. So if you're in a country, like if you're in Turkey, for example, then I can tell you who the geo principal for Turkey is and put them in contact with you. You know, if you're in Japan, if you're in Italy, wherever you are, I can help you get in contact with them. So what I wanted to do was just kind of hand over to Laura first, because Laura came to one of the geo plenaries from Youth Mappers, and we paid for her to come. And we want to do more of that going forward, but we need to kind of think about how do we make those connections, and what's in it for you, and what can you give back to the geo work program and to the geo community. And then maybe Deanna can talk about she's done some more concrete actions in terms of hackathons and some of the other things she's thinking around in terms of the pandemic right now. So if I can hand back to the moderator, and maybe you could let Laura talk a little bit about her experience.
Just a question, how can we get that slide after the session or no?
Yeah, I mean, Cheryl has them, so feel free to take them.
Good, thanks.
So thank you very much, Stephen, for that presentation. So I think now we can proceed with Laura. Hi, Laura. You can share your screen if you have any presentation, or if not, yeah, I pass over this.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Laura. I'm from Nairobi, Kenya. I live and work there. Professionally, I'm a trained geospatial engineer, but I currently work for an organization on sales operations. So I'll just talk about the time in 2018, the time I attended the GeoPlenary, which was in Kyoto, Japan. Yeah, so I had a side event at the plenary, which was focused on how Earth observations are being used and can be used to provide solutions, mostly focusing on the Sustainable Development Goals. So yeah, that happened a day before the plenary. But what was exciting about the GeoPlenary in particular, as compared to other geospatial conferences, was the fact that you'd get a bit of both sides. So you'd get a lot on the technical bits on Earth observations and geospatial technology, but you'll also get a lot on policy and basically a lot of things that scientists and geospatial data users don't get to look at. So it was such an exciting opportunity to get to also learn about that. And then we also get to meet like key players within the Earth observation sector. So everyone from NASA to survey to all those supporting organizations for the GEO group, yeah. So, and also I'd say it was through that I got to learn about Digital Earth Africa and also like met the engineers who are working on it and worked on it from NASA. And yeah, since then I've seen Digital Earth Africa transitioning from that to AfriGeo, from AfriGeo moving to another country, and then actually having the first Digital Earth Africa Forum in Africa last year in Nairobi. So as Stephen has shared, you can see the amazing work that GEOSS is doing, and they're pretty much open to working with anyone, students, professionals, young professionals. So yeah, I don't think, I think Stephen has shared everything and about GEO and how one can engage and how anyone can participate. Yeah, I think that is it from me for now.
Thanks, Laura.
So I think we can move on to Diana.
Hi, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. I have a couple of slides that I'm going to share with you now. Let me see, share. Can you see the slides?
Yes, we can see the slides.
Okay, so hi, my name is Diana Mastracci, and I'm an anthropologist with a background in GIS and remote sensing, and have experience working with indigenous communities in different space agencies, and have recently worked with Stephen on GeoHack 19, which was a global hackathon by and for indigenous and underrepresented youth from around the world. The event was sponsored by Geoscience Australia in collaboration with the University of Southeast Alaska, the NCI in Australia, the Rainforest Foundation, GeoBond, the Asian Institute of Technology, and NASA. So why indigenous people? Despite the fact that indigenous communities make less than 5% of the world population, they represent as many as 5,000 cultures and speak 96% of the world estimated 7,000 languages. And over centuries, they have developed an intricate dynamic knowledge of their environment that is transferred orally through legends and stories. This traditional knowledge is not only their way of sustenance, but also the very basis of their identities. As you know, indigenous people from the Arctic all the way to the Amazon forest are also at the forefront of climate change and are looking at novel ways to adapt to the changing climate by combining their traditional knowledge with science. So how can we broaden the participation of indigenous people to support local responses to these pressing global challenges? To tackle this question, we decided to turn to the wisdom of the crowd and design a hackathon that is a sprint-like competition in which anyone can get together and create solutions for given challenges. However, we wanted the hackathon to be truly inclusive and give voice to the data needs of indigenous people, and as well as promote the use of free and open source Earth observation data. So based on previous fieldwork conducted among indigenous communities and recommendations from indigenous leaders, we knew that Earth observation data and information communication technologies can have a meaningful impact among the indigenous youth if they're used to increase elder-youth interaction, as this is how the knowledge is transferred in those communities. increase cross-cultural communication between indigenous youth and scientists, because the communities want their youth to have a foot both in the scientific and traditional worldview, as well as maintain and strengthen their local culture, as this is their basis of their traditional knowledge. So in order to put the users at the heart of the process and take into account this recommendation by indigenous leaders, we decided to have a series of pre-hackathons before the final hack that took place between September and October in local indigenous and underrepresented communities, to allow the communities themselves to co-design the challenges for their final hackathon. So these pre-hack activities took place in Alaska, South America, Thailand, and Australia. And throughout the process, the students were mentored by some wonderful remote sensing professionals from working in different space agencies as well as universities such as NASA, the European Space Agency, the University of Michigan, Sydney, Oxford, and many more. The students, they then pitched their ideas to local leaders, and collectively they picked the most relevant challenge for their community. And then on November 2nd, the final hack was launched, and people from all over the world participated to solve the challenges presented by the local communities. In total, there were 19 challenges that ranged from an app to record stories and cultural practices, to mapping coastal erosion over time, to a health information monitoring system. And the challenges were all extremely interesting, and most importantly, they were relevant to the local community. And hackers had only 2 days to develop their open source solutions, and to ensure the solutions were culturally relevant, the elders and cultural leaders of each community were part of the judging panel. The winning team were a group of young professionals from Australia with their app, Our Map. The aim of their app is to preserve indigenous knowledge and facilitate the learning of this knowledge by users adding to the database themselves with the active consent of indigenous communities. The database will serve as a vehicle by which intergenerational cultural experiences may be preserved. After winning the competition, the winning team started their own geospatial company. And there is also a group in Thailand that is currently working with a team in Germany to further their own solution. And overall, it was a very fun and innovative way of giving voice to the data needs of indigenous and underrepresented communities. I'm still in touch with many of the participants who are further working to develop their applications. And yeah, that's all. Thank you for listening. And I'm currently in discussion with Stephen on designing a hackathon to tackle the current pandemic using Earth observation data. So if you would like to take part, please get in touch. My email is right here. Thank you very much.